Well, good afternoon. Um, Thank you so much for joining us today. We are at our last session of the two-day Community Alliance Summit, and I think this is going to definitely top things off. Um, I hope you've found things interesting. I hope you have learned new things, and I hope you will continue to engage with everyone and the organizations that you've seen over the last 2 days. My name is Dana Thompson. I'm a project officer for Pennsylvania Developmental Disabilities Council, in case you've just joined us. I have the pleasure of turning over our session to Nicole Mendez. But first, I'd like to remind you, if you do have questions or comments, please place them in the chat box or the Q&A box. And without further ado, welcome, Nicole.
Thank you, Dana. And thank you to the DD Council for this opportunity to facilitate an incredibly important conversation on inclusion, equity, and rights in education. My name is Nicole Mendez. I'm an education advocate with the Delaware County Advocacy and Resource Organization. I'm a Latina woman with brown curly hair that stops right at my shoulders. I am wearing a white collar top, and I'm speaking to you today from my Zoom Nook/office in my dining room. Behind me is a turquoise upright piano. On top of the piano are assorted framed family photos, a vase with hydrangeas, and a potted plant. And above that on the wall is an abstract painting. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. The stewards of today's conversation are women from varied backgrounds and expertise, and I'm honored to be your moderator. Before I turn it over to Carrie to start off our panelist introductions, I would like to remind everyone to keep your introductions brief and be sure to include a visual description of yourself and your surroundings, as well as your pronouns. Carrie?
Thank you, Nicole. My name is Carrie Woodard. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am a mixed race Black woman with dark curly hair. I'm wearing a royal blue blouse, and I am in my office with lots of children's books behind me. And I am a national certified school counselor. I work for Propel Schools, which is a large charter school network based out of the greater Pittsburgh region in the western half of the state in Allegheny County. And I will pass it over to Nia if she's over here.
Nia is not actually in the session yet. We're trying to work to get in.
No problem. Nicole, who is next on the docket?
Go to Anita.
All right, Anita.
Hi, I'm Anita Kulik. I am a white woman. I have a bob haircut way back. They used to call it a page boy. I am in my office, which has been my home office since a year and a half ago. I am thrilled to say in the upper corner there is a picture of Rosa Parks, who I had the pleasure of meeting. So I love to be able to have a chance to show that off. I am a president of Educating Communities for Parenting. We work out of the Philadelphia region. We work with all kinds of marginalized populations, those in the juvenile justice system, teenagers who are in foster care, who are aging out of the system, and parents of who are in need, including parents who are mandated by court. One of the things I am most proud about is we actually run a program for families impacted by blindness and visual impairment. But thank you.
Dr. Lorraine? Is she with us?
My apologies there. Hello, my name is Dr. Lorraine Minion. I am a middle-aged white woman who is very fair-skinned, wears glasses, has shoulder-length brown hair. It's mostly straight. I am in my home office right now, which also serves as the guest room and somewhat storage. So very casual environment here. I work for the Lincoln Intermediate Unit out of York County, and I am placed at York County School of Technology, where I am the primary instructor for a brand new innovative program which removes or reduces barriers for students who have an interest in career and technology education. So primarily students who would typically be denied access to this type of program. They get to experience personal agency where they're selecting their own programs. They receive supports and opportunity in the environment. I'm very happy to be part of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And since Nia hasn't joined, go ahead, Rebecca.
Hi, thank you. I'm Rebecca Bonner, and I am an Irish woman with reddish brown shoulder length hair. I am wearing a green shirt, and I am sitting in my admin assistant's office. I moved offices recently, and I don't have a good space in there yet for to be on Zoom or this any platform, virtual platform. My dog Rudy. Behind me is a file cabinet with files and some block glass window that goes out into the foyer. My dog, 17-year-old dog Rudy, is with me, so you may see him if strolling across the screen. Hopefully, we won't hear him. I'm the executive director of the Bridgeway School, which is Pennsylvania's first recovery high school for students in grades 9 through 12 who've struggled with co-occurring substance use and mental health disorders. We're located in Southeast Pennsylvania, serving largely the 5-county area. And is it, Nicole, can I just take a minute here to do a little bit of a disclaimer?
Yes, please.
Before we start,
Yeah.
okay. So this is a very important discussion today, and we're hoping that a number of you will engage with us and make it more of a conversation than us being a group of talking heads. One of the main focuses of this panel is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you may have noticed and heard from our descriptions that we are by and large, well, we're all women, and we are by and large white and on the older side. And this did not go unnoted by us as we were planning this, this panel discussion. And we just want to say that we recognize that that is a limitation. We also wanted to acknowledge that all of our organizations have made really solid commitments to, raising into our senior leadership women and men of color. Also, I should say my pronouns are hers.
Thank you.
Add to that little disclaimer. Like cover it.
I think you did great, Rebecca. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I have 5 questions, and if Nia is able to join us, hopefully one for each panelist. But as Rebecca said, this is a conversation, so please feel free to use the chat function, and let's open a dialogue about these very important topics. And again, while all of the panelists are encouraged to add to the conversation, I remind everyone to please be mindful of the time so that we have enough time at the end for Q&A. As I'm sure many of you would agree, an hour just simply isn't enough time to cover fully this topic. My first question is for Carrie. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted some glaring disparities with regard to education in the United States. Families of color experience more economic hardship, food insecurity, and lack of access to technology, all of which hindered access to remote learning. Now that we are pushing forward towards a recovery phase of the pandemic, what support should be put into place in order to help rebuild community and trust now and after the pandemic?
Thank you, Nicole, for this question. I'm really honored to be here tonight and discussing a topic that I'm extremely passionate about. So thank you, everyone, for having me tonight. The pandemic has forever changed our lives, and for our youth, it's really changed the course of education forever. And Nicole, you're absolutely right that the pandemic has further exposed the discrepancies and educational experiences for our students from marginalized communities compared to their white counterparts. Studies have shown time and again that our Black and Brown students are more likely to remain remote. However, they don't necessarily always have the access to the things that they need to succeed academically, such as the devices that they need, reliable internet, and live teaching with teachers. Studies have also shown that those who came into the pandemic with the fewest academic opportunities, they're also on track to exit with the greatest learning loss. And some may accuse students of quote unquote checking out of school, or accuse their parents and guardians of checking out of their child's education when that isn't the case. A lot of times this can be attributed to the lack of student-teacher relationships. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. Relationships are necessary. And love fuels achievement. You know, I'm coming from an education background. Love fuels achievement. So building relationships that create safe environments, that build trust and allow students to take risks and overcome academic challenges is what's needed. And I also want to point out that we need to listen to our clients and listen to our students, and don't make assumptions about what's best for them. Talk to them. I work for Propel Schools. I'm the project manager for Propel Partners in Wellness. So I oversee our wellness programming, and I work with a fantastic group of staff liaisons and prevention specialists. And one of the things that we do is we prioritize professional development for our teachers. So as adults, I think we really need to take a step back and really commit to our own learning and know that we are or should be lifelong learners as well. Something else that we have done specific to the pandemic. So at the beginning of the pandemic, when we're all kind of flying by the seat of our pants, what do we do? How do we still engage families? One of the things that we did at Propel Schools was engage families with different webinars that would be important to them and things that they needed. So for example, my department, we held a webinar on internet safety, how to keep our kids safe while they're using their devices more often than they were before. We held a webinar, an interactive dialogue kind of like this with parents about what kind of supports they can expect from the schools, because I know that was a huge concern with us starting remotely last year. You know, what mental health and behavioral health supports can I expect for my child? Also giving the opportunity for our teachers to talk with our staff as far as, our teachers to talk with our parents and guardians as far as helping with ELA and math, and how do I help my student? They're home all the time now, and I need to help them with their work and their homework. So that was super important. And we also did something creative where we had family movie nights that were virtual, and we've really focused on social emotional learning and having some discussion questions that they could go over as a family. So that's just another example. At Propel Schools, we have 13 schools, and 3 of our schools follow the community school model. So that's something that I'm a huge cheerleader for. The community schools provide enrichment and wellness programming and health and social services for the students and their families and staff and the community at large. So that's something to consider as well. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention DEI work. So I'm sure a lot of us have seen this in our agencies and our schools, that there's been this push for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's really taking center stage, especially since 2020 and the social unrest that we experienced as a nation. So in addition to looking at student test scores and grades and attendance rates, look at why are students going to school? Why are they not going to school? Looking at staff attendance and retention rates is important. And then diversity in staff, or the lack thereof. It's very important for students, for your clients, to see people who work with them who look like them. So I would implore you to, talk to HR and talk to talent and, see why is the makeup the way that it looks. How are we going to recruit teachers that look like them, whether that's Black and brown, whether that's other marginalized populations. And then one other thing I really want to put into this space is seeking feedback and talking with your students and your clients. So thinking, do your families respect and trust you? Do you know the aspirations and the hopes and the dreams that they have for their child? Are you making decisions for them, or are you making decisions with them? There's a really big difference there. Are you listening to their needs? So we understand education is paramount, and without educational justice, there cannot be social justice, because educational and racial justice are essentially the same thing. So I did enough talking. I would like to open that up to any of the other panelists on this call.
Thank you, Carrie. I really love what you said about that love drives education. I think we all saw that relationships is key to all of this. I mean, really, it's going to be the only way that we're going to find the solutions out of here, because I think the children that thrived had relationships built with their educators. And if no one else has anything to add to this particular question, I see that Nia joined us. So because I want her to be a part of this discussion before her question comes up, I'm just going to give her a brief opportunity to introduce herself. So go ahead, Nia.
Hi, yes, my name is Nia Stanley, and I too work at Propel Schools. My pronouns are she and her. I am an African-American woman with some hair that's doing whatever it wants, and some tortoiseshell glasses. I am really happy to be here. I am beyond embarrassed to be late, but here we are together, and I look forward to speaking and listening.
Thank you, Nia. Glad to have you. My next question is for Rebecca, but I'd like all of the panelists to weigh in on this. Navigating today's educational system is not an easy nor straightforward task for anyone. Studies have shown that there is a disparity between white families and non-white families having access to advocacy, such as in educational policy and childhood disability advocacy. What are some solutions for addressing the stark disparities that marginalized groups experience with regards to access to advocacy and advocacy support services? What reforms may be needed at the community agency level to ensure that all people, regardless of background, have the same opportunities that have historically been afforded to white families? Rebecca?
Yes, thank you for that question. And I'll answer it relatively briefly. I know that there are other panelists that can address more specifically learning differences and other disabilities. We at Bridgeway, we see inequity all the time. We work with a lot of kids with substance use disorder, and it is, for the 10 years that we've been open, it is no secret that white kids tend to get treatment. They go to court and they get sent to treatment, and kids of color get adjudicated to treatment, facilities. And one of the things that is part of our mission at the Bridgeway School is to make sure that we are offering an education that provides a diversion to the students, particularly of color, although we about half and half kids of color and white kids. But it provides a diversionary program, a diversionary option to keep kids out of juvenile placement and be able to get an education, not have their education interrupted, being able to access the same kinds of educational services that white families do. That's answering specifically from my background. And I know that I think Anita has some points she wants to add to this as well.
Great, thank you so much, Rebecca. Yes, advocacy is the key. Not only do I work with families of color and different cultures, I also work with the families, as I said, who are impacted by blindness and visual impairment. Advocacy is essential if any of these people can expect to be successful, and especially to provide their children with the resources they need. When I see the inequities between white people and people who have enough income and the advocacy they can get and the people that we work with, it's heartbreaking. But for any of us on this panel and any of you in the audience, we can't sit around and be upset or heartbroken. We need to go into action. So one of the things we do is literally teach how to advocate. And we do this in a lot of different ways. Number one, we do provide them with resources, phone numbers, things like that. But how many of us, I just had an experience trying to call an organization. We call, they hang up. Well, when they hang up on me, I get angry. But when you're a young teen of color who is aging out of the foster care system and somebody's rude, you figure they're being rude to you because of who you are. That might be the case, but we need to help them get beyond that. We also need them to learn not to be aggressive, but to be assertive in a really good way. We do this in a really, in a way that can also be fun. We do lots of incredibly valuable role plays. We prepare them for what they're supposed to like go in and know what you're going to say. Have your goal in mind. Sometimes we actually even tell them, you know what? It's the name of the game is get what you need to get for your child. And one of the programs that we are most proud of is we work with parents who have children who are in the juvenile justice system, and right before they go into their hearings to see if the child will be released from placement or sent away for more placement, we have conversations with them to tell them that when you go in there, try to understand that the juvenile justice people that you're meeting really are looking for what's best for your child. Go in there and try to understand. You need to advocate. You don't need to argue. And I think, as I said, we keep going back. Education is the key. Relationship is the key. And I can't even speak to how important this is. Thank you.
Did any of our panelists have anything to add to that question?
Actually, I would add a little follow-up to that as well. Some of the things that you've already talked about so far, when I get to the point where I get to respond to a bigger question, includes the importance of a relationship between those stakeholders and their students or their clients, however you address them. I know, for the years that I've been a teacher, being able to call on parents and say, here's the situation. Let's work together and collaborate on this and see if we can't resolve this. As part of advocacy, going back to that, I have built into my curriculums ongoing relationship with OVR and MHIDD, OVR standing for the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, which is related to the Bureau of Blind and Visual Services, but also MHIDD providing those services for students, particularly once they age out of school, once they graduate. We do historically have this kind of black hole where people don't have access to services, or they don't know how to access services, or the services are inadequate. There's a lot of support while they're in school. I know over the last year and a half, schools are important and critical for some kids in terms of getting breakfast, getting lunch, taking food home for dinner, taking food home for the weekend. Oftentimes, the nursing staff in the school is the first line of defense in terms of healthcare. In our school, it's a very pro-student and pro-teacher environment where that is not true in every school, but oftentimes your teachers or the staff in the school are the first people kids come to when there's crisis at home. So I love the idea of helping parents become better advocates for their children, but also I also think we're the first line of defense there, because we are typically better informed on how to beeline in on what kind of services you need, who can provide those services, and how you can advocate for that. So I like what's being said, and I applaud that. I agree with it 100%.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Nicole, if I could just add something really briefly too. I mean, I think it's really important I know that we do it as part of our curriculum, is that we really help students to feel empowered to advocate for themselves. And one of the things that we've been working on is creating more of an anti-racist culture. And part of that involves some really difficult, honest conversations about the realities of the world, and not trying to sugarcoat anything, and recognizing that everybody's experience is not different and is not the same, and that can be very much impacted by the color of one's skin or their gender identity, but definitely by the color of one's skin. So we work very, very long and hard to help students feel empowered to advocate within our systems and our institutions.
Thank you. And I know I'm not a panelist, but I would like to add, at the Delaware County Advocacy and Resource Organization, we're happy to provide support to any organization because families need what I find full understanding of what LRE is, least restrictive environment. And I know Dr. Lane is going to talk a little bit more about IDEA, but advocacy groups are happy to always partner with organizations like yourselves to help do parent workshops and training in regards to special education and IEP. My next question, which actually segues nicely to what we already spoke about so far, is for Anita. Anita, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality to describe the experience of living with multiple identities. While there have been more conversations about some intersections like race and gender, there have been other experiences that are often overlooked, even in conversations about equity. How can educators best support students living with multiple identities, such as the experience of people of color who have disabilities, are experiencing homelessness, or are part of the foster care system? What reforms may be needed?
I actually work with all of those populations, and it really is, they struggle. They have all these different issues. They are viewed differently by different people. It can be overwhelming. And one of the things we have to be able to do is make sure that people feel very comfortable with who they are. And if you're a teen parent and you have chosen to have that child and raise that child and come to us and have parenting classes, you should be proud. And we'll hear stories of people getting on the bus, and they said that the minute they get on a bus with the baby, they know the other passengers on the bus are looking at them and condemning them. And they'll come back and talk to us about that. And the fact that they're able to come and share that and let us know allows us to discuss it, allows them to hear how others feel. During the pandemic and the lack of services, and one of the populations that was, well, two populations that we dealt with were most impacted. One was actually what Lorraine mentioned. She called, I don't know whether you said it was a black hole, it's the youth, the older youth who are aging out of the foster care system. And we actually work with those who are parenting. And this pandemic, of all the groups, has devastated that group. That Lorraine was talking about, the schools being there, helping them. They weren't going to school. They just stopped showing up. They were adults. So many of them had chosen to go back to alternative schools. They didn't have to go back to school. They could have just stayed home, but they decided between the age of 18 and 21, they wanted a diploma. They're gone. And we need to make sure that we reach out to them because they've got so many burdens. They're in the foster care system, then they're going to be aging out of the foster care system. Then they might be a Black male who was in the juvenile justice system. And it's just overwhelming. And, you know, we keep saying it over and over again, and it's a cliche, but it comes down to relationships. And the more secure relationships these groups can have with people who can be there, the better they are. One of the killers is that programs like ours get funded for 12 weeks in many cases, which means that after 12 weeks, we're supposed to say goodbye. We can't do that. We need to keep that relationship going and build upon it because so many of the people we're dealing with had people who helped them and then moved out of their lives. So it is a constant struggle. They need constant support. And thank goodness there are organizations around here that can provide that.
Thank you, Anita. Is there anyone else that would like to add to that topic? My next question is for Dr. Lorraine. Often students with disabilities have at least one parent living with a disability. In terms of employability, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, people with disabilities exhibit a less than 18% employment rate. This often results in high poverty rates for people with disabilities and their children. How does this impact their access to educational opportunity and future employability? How can we increase future employability for students with disabilities?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, this is something I know we've all said, this is what we feel passionate about, this aspect of education. This is what really sticks to my heart here. When we talk about students who come in and you're working with their parents, we just mentioned advocacy. If you've got parents who are also someone who's on the spectrum or someone who has an intellectual disability, they don't know how to advocate effectively. And oftentimes it is very frustrating. And it goes back to what Anita was saying, don't be argumentative, but be an advocate. They may not have the skills to do that, or they may just need support. They know what they want for their son or daughter, but they need support in advocating effectively for their son or daughter. You know, I've had the opportunity to work with parents who have multiple children, all of whom receive special education services. So when we talk about quality of life, and we use terms which, you know, hasn't been brought up yet, but kind of dance all around it, things like personal agency, the ability to make choices about your own life, and what do you want out of life, and what kind of work do you want to do, and where do you want to live, and with whom do you want to live. Things like social capital, you know, when your opinion and your perspective and your contributions are valued. You have this social capital that you bring to the table. Social equity, right? The sense of being fair, that they have fair access. I know what opportunities I wanted for my own children when they were in school. That is no different from a parent who might also have a disability or living in poverty. They want maximum opportunity for their son or daughter to go on and live a meaningful life. So how do we achieve that for them? I think we need to spend some time thinking about how do we get them to a place where they can have a meaningful education, an education that once they finish, they complete the program, they go on to higher education if that's their plan, or on to job training if that's their plan, that they can make a livable wage. That number, 18% of unemployment, when the overall numbers are about 70% either underemployed or unemployed for people with disabilities. That means those people are on public funds, and that serves no one here. That serves no one. It's not a high quality of life for them, and it's not good use of taxpayer money. So when we think about developing a program, I think we need to collaborate with agencies that provide the types of support that help these individuals transition from a very supportive school environment into an adult life. And that means we need to work together. We need to provide those services. When we talk about high quality of life, we're talking about, I get to make decisions about the kind of work that I do, the kind of people I spend my time with, the kind of things I do for fun, the quality of life that I live, what kind of housing do I have, the kinds of foods that I eat, access to good, healthy food. So it is a very complex issue, but I think when we get into developing programs for our students, we dovetail all these other services that when they age out, that's the term that's been used, or graduate, that they're not just left into this no man's land, and they have resources to continue to develop the skills to be a well-off adult.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Sure.
Before I move on to the next question, I'm curious, can you talk a little bit more about IDEA and the mandate in regards to transition planning prior to aging out?
Sure. I want to be cognizant of the time, but when we talk about funding of schools, right, when we talk about funding of schools and where the money comes for, we know that schools that are well funded tend to have better programs and more services and more services even outside of the regular school day for our students. So when we take a look at how schools are funded, about 20% or so comes from the federal government, and that's pretty much for the free breakfast, free lunch programs, and for special education. About 50, sometimes 60% comes from the state, and another 30% or so comes from local taxes. If you live in a high poverty area where people aren't paying taxes, you don't get that money made up elsewhere. You learn to budget your school programs on 70% of what other schools are getting. And that tends to be an environment where students need more assistance, not less. They need better quality teachers, better quality programs, current technology. So when we talk about things like least restrictive environment, we're trying to find ways to bring those students who might have unique learning needs into the regular ed classroom with additional support, so to help them be successful in there. There's a new term that it's, well, maybe not new, but it's not as common as least restrictive environment, and that would be UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, right? Where we should be designing lessons that are good for everybody. What's really nice about if you want to say the silver lining to the pandemic, is that schools found a way to find personal devices for everybody, and found a way to make sure even the poorest members of the community have access to internet service and were able to get online, because quite frankly, up until the pandemic, a lot of my students did not have computers at home, did not have internet service. And it was a challenge to do any kind of homework outside of class. So when we talk about universal design for learning, it means using technology to their benefit and to their aid, and developing lessons and content that blend well into future employment opportunities.
Thank you so much for bringing up UDL. Go ahead,
No,
Anita.
I just want to add, when I first learned about that, it reminded me of the way it used to be when you were a teacher. You were given a curriculum, there were things you needed to follow, there were things you needed to teach, but you were actually able to adapt your particular methods of teaching to meet the needs of your students. So that meant I could have 4 8th grade classes learning the same thing, but we're doing it different ways. One of the most terrible things of No Child Left Behind were those curricula where everybody had to be on the same page at the same time. And what it did was it caused so many of the people we're talking about now who are aging out of this system, those people were actually pushed out of schools. They didn't want them in there because they would bring the test scores down. I was so thrilled to learn about this movement again, and I hope that it really takes charge and goes across the country. The other thing it does is, I'm a teacher. Several of us started as teachers. Once you're a teacher, you're always a teacher, no matter what you become. We approach things differently. What is insulting to me is the way many institutions or counties or districts feel that if they give a person a curriculum with the word for word what they should say, they can teach the program.
Yeah.
They take away the art, the talent, the emotion, and I'm going to right back to that relationship. And that's what we need to do. We really do. And so I would say, I guess the 2 things that we need most for people who are marginalized and people who are suffering from lack of services and respect are both relationships and education.
And if I can
Thank you.
dovetail on that, Anita, just to add on to that, another thing that has really been demoralizing for students is the standardized testing. It serves no instructional purpose whatsoever. It's a measure as to whether the teacher's doing the job, and it really is not an effective measure. So I would add that to your list of things that needs to change, is to get rid of the standardized testing.
Yeah. Thank you. And in regards to relationship, I would also just add that cultural competency, culturally affirming, all of this type of training really needs to be pretty prevalent amongst professional development with teachers and educators. My final question is for Nia, and I encourage you, Nia, to take your time. We're right on time. We're doing really well. Let me start. So in recent years, many organizations have vowed to commit to racial equity and justice. With regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion, what are some practical steps for an organization to embrace equity and either rebuild or restructure its organizational culture?
I'm glad it's my turn, because many times as people were talking, I'm like, should I say something now? Should I wait? Should I say something now?
Take your time.
So one of my favorite quotes that I've heard doing this DEI work is that the system is designed to get the results that we see. Like, it's designed specifically to get the results that we're seeing now, right? So the ways our schools are set up are designed to do just that. I also heard a conversation about how schools are funded. Also, another system that was designed to get these exact outcomes. So as we're doing this work, and as we're in our agencies and we're talking about advocacy and we're talking about education, it is critical, not critical race theory, but it is critical that we are having professional development about race, like, period. It's so necessary. I'm looking at this comment about from Denise about the juvenile probation officer and how the judges and lawyers treated parents of color. Yes, we have a serious systemic race problem in this country, and to deny it serves no one. I mean, it literally serves no one. We must, in our agencies, advocate for that. We need to advocate for implicit bias training, for anti-racism training, because the lived experiences of marginalized community members are vastly different from the majority, right? So they're already facing this barrier. And then when we're talking about, I'm hearing about foster children aging out of the system, they're raising another generation of kids that are just perpetuating the cycle. And so we really need our educators to be well-versed in those things. That's first and foremost, because you can't have an authentic relationship with a student when you're unwilling to recognize such a humongous part of their identity. Curriculum is white-centric, and that's just what it is. So when we're talking about culture responsive teaching, the best gift that we can give children from marginalized groups is to say, look at where you came from, look at the excellence from which you came, look at the people, the lineage, the history that you've come from. We're not just enslaved Africans where we had an identity before that. We have people in our community that are leaders. I mean, if we just talk about the coronavirus, it's a Black female scientist leading the charge of the coronavirus vaccination. Do children know that? Do children know that redlining, which was a law, is the reason that we see the communities the way they are and the reason that their schools are underfunded? And can we look at political leaders that have came before them and that are out here now trying to change these narratives? If we look at the wealth gap with the GI Bill, the original GI Bill, we had Black veterans come back to this country that were not able to have access to the education, the housing, the loans. And when they were sent to trade schools, they were sent to substandard trade schools because of segregation. So we need our children from marginalized communities to know the outcomes that you're seeing are in no way your fault. Society will tell you that it's your fault, but it's not. So the first thing that we need to do is empower these youth. And we need to start with why. Why are we doing this work? And how much do we love these children and families? Are we willing to put ourselves in uncomfortable conversations and look at our own biases? We all have them. We can all take the Harvard implicit bias test right now, and it will show us where our biases lie. I had biases against Black people. I'm a Black person. So it's not, when you get your results, it's not to indict you, it's for you to recognize, as human beings, we're getting so much input, right? We have to filter it. And unfortunately, we've been manipulated to filter it against certain people in a negative way, right? We have to perceive threats. And unfortunately, the media and different things have caused us to sometimes have biases against people that is in no way their fault. But we have to acknowledge it. We can't ignore it. We have to think about poverty. If you have an opportunity to attend a poverty simulation, please do. It's a session where you literally role play and you navigate the situations that come along with poverty. You might be assigned to be a 16-year-old. Somebody mentioned a teen mom. You might be assigned to be a 16-year-old teen mom, and you have to navigate getting ready to have a baby, the financial aspect of it, but also getting your education. You might be in a family unit where your parents aren't educated. You might be in one where you are, but you have to navigate all these situations. And it's not a situation where the outcome is not intended for you to feel sorry, but it's for you to have empathy and to understand, okay, this person seems hostile in this meeting that we're having, or this person seems checked out of this meeting that we're having. It could be because of all the other stressors that they have on them.
Mhm.
So again, it's not to make excuses, it's just to foster empathy, right? So first we start with our why. Why are we doing this work, and what are we willing to give up comfort-wise to do it with fidelity? And then we have to focus on our identity work. Doing DEI work has led me to understand that people that aren't from marginalized groups don't always think about their race, right? And if you're not Black or Latina okay, if you're white, do you think about your race? Have you thought about your race? And you don't have to answer, but do you think about your race? Because if you are from a marginalized group, you think about your race all the time. You think about, did I not get that job because I'm Black? Did I not have a good experience at the agency because I'm Black? Right? So it's such a huge part. So first you want to think about your own identity. I heard the word intersectionality mentioned. There's different identity work activities that you can do, and really think about your race, how you identify in terms of like your pronouns, your religion. Are you a neurodiverse person? Do you have special needs of some sort? You know, do you have ADHD? Do you have like a learning impairment? Because the children that we serve are going to grow up and go out into the world ideally and get jobs, and they might be at the agency. They might be an educator. So think about your own needs as a person, your socioeconomic status, all of that, and think about where can you be an ally and where do you maybe need to be an ally. For example, I am a Black female. My pronouns are she, her. I identify as straight. I'm a Christian. I am an educated person, right? So I can advocate for other, and I'm a single mom too. So I can advocate for other single moms who maybe need help at navigating the educational system. Some of the acronyms and terminology that I heard being thrown out, like IDEA and LEAs and all these things, that can be overwhelming to some parents. They might not know what that means. And so I can be an advocate that way. I can be an advocate for a person from the LGBTQ community, but I need an advocate myself based on my race. So that's what identity work does. Carrie was kind enough to get me a book called Start Here, Start Now by Liz Kleinfeld, I believe.
Kleinrock.
Kleinrock, yes. And that is a book that I highly recommend. It talks about literally like how to start in this work. And it's really designed more for educators, but everyone can benefit from it. And it really starts there with the identity work and how powerful that can be in terms of unlocking your starting point in this work. And then lastly, remembering that this diversity, equity, and inclusion work is a journey. It's a long game, right? The first enslaved Africans arrived in this country in 1619. And we've seen so much happen since then, since Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Movement. I mean, just so many different markers in history. And here we are still unable to come to a place of just understanding and we just can't seem to get on the same page. But you have to remember, like I said, this is a journey. This is not going, like what we're seeing happen over several hundred years, and it's going to take a while for us to sort of undo some of what we're seeing. But just maintain hope and do what you can. You know, do what you can in your agencies. be mindful of people's lived experiences, be willing to learn, and also be willing to listen. And I think I've talked quite enough.
Beautifully said, though.
Thank you, Nia. That was awesome.
I know we're pressed for time. I just wanted to add something real quick. So Nia and I both together at Propel Schools in Pittsburgh. Something that we've both been involved in over the summer is Propel Schools is making a commitment to equity. And one of our commitments is a diverse and inclusive environment that fosters positive identity, belonging, agency, and purpose. And something that I think really helps us with these uncomfortable conversations, or these, these necessary conversations, is we stick to our norms. And some of our norms, some of the favorites, there's only 7 of them, but one of them is avoiding the conspiracy of politeness. So if we can all commit to that, the real conversations can start happening. Another one is listen to understand, listen to challenge, listen for what surprises us so learning can happen. And another one of my favorites is keeping students in the center and being aware of not prioritizing adult comfort. So there's 7 norms, but for me personally, I think it's just very helpful. If we can all stick to those norms, then change can really start to occur. So if you're, really diving into that DEI work in your agency or your school, come up with some norms collectively and then stick to those. It's very, very helpful.
Thank you for that insight, Carrie. All right, so we have some time left, about 10 minutes. I'd like to open it up to the floor for any of the attendees. I believe you can raise your hand if you would like to speak and unmute yourself, or you can put some questions in the chat. All right, not seeing any questions. I think we can continue. I know there's so much more to say. I love that resource that you gave, the 7 norms. Was it Carrie? Is there a link or a website that you can put into the chat for those participants as they're digging into the DEI work?
Yeah, I can put those into the chat. Just give me a moment.
I'm not sure. They may be on the resource slide. I also put that into the chat as well. And then Dina said the resources can be added to the webpage. Awesome. Thank you, Dina. Nia, for those individuals that are working at lower level, entry level positions in organizations who don't feel as though they have enough agency within their organization to advocate that their organization does some of this kind of DEI work and put forth effort towards more equity. What type of advice would you give to those individuals to advocate that their group and organization look towards moving to rebuild and restructure some of their equity efforts?
I would argue that there's no one in an organization that doesn't have enough of a voice. I mean, I know that's more of a feeling, but I think that if you're in a workplace, regardless of your position, you should feel comfortable and confident about having those conversations. And if you aren't in a workplace where you feel like you can say something without being frowned upon, then you probably should look for a different place of employment. And I know that's easier said than done, but I think it just starts with, sometimes things start with one person. It could be where, again, if you don't live the experience of a person from a marginalized group, it might be hard for you to even fathom what that is like. And so if you're not thinking about that, it might need to be called to your attention. And so I would encourage people to think about the person that they have the best relationship with that would be a decision maker about that, and just start a conversation. And it doesn't have to be like, okay, well, starting tomorrow, like we're going to slap these norms on the wall and we're going to, make an anti-racist statement. Like, it might have to start smaller. But again, it's a journey. It's not a race. The outcomes that we're seeing have been in the making for hundreds of years and just starting small. It might start with a book club. You might say like, hey, like, why don't we read How to Be Anti-Racist by Dr. Ibram Kendi? Why don't we, you know, just depending on the agency, there could be some literature about marginalized communities in the special needs community that you might have access to, and just say, hey, like, what do you guys think about reading this book? And just start there.
Thank you, Nia.
James Baldwin wrote, if I love you, I have to make you conscious of the things that you don't see. And I love that quote. And I know that we all serve our students and we serve our clients, and Nia has said this to me and it has resonated with me when she said it, like, do you love your kids enough to put yourself out there and to learn this work and to really work on yourself and with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Do you love them enough? Like, ask yourself that.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. All right. So we're doing really great. I mean, we have 5 more minutes. There's no questions in the chat. I feel like seeing that right. Can we talk a little bit about I know there are DEIs, diversity, equity, and inclusion committees popping up everywhere in school districts. And what I'm seeing is sometimes they are excluding the disability component. So wondering if we could talk a little bit about you know, how we can ensure that those DEI groups are inclusive of disability. Wait. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead and take that briefly. We do have 2 questions in the Q&A that I apparently did miss.
Okay, so you want to do the questions?
I'm going to see if, I don't know why my Q&A isn't, I just see the chat function.
I'll just quickly add that when the diversity issue came up and people were talking about that, we started to see the parallels between the disability communities too. And they are also not looked at. They are also judged the minute they walk in a room. There are people who are literally blind or very low vision who will go for a job interview and not let people know that they are blind. People of color don't have that option. It is important, and I'm hoping that when we look at what has happened, that those of us, and it's not everybody, which is very upsetting, who are understanding that the history we learned was incorrect in many cases, those of us who thought we were not biased or did not have bias, they were there in the system, and we are open to accept differences no matter what they are. Not accept that it's such a corny to embrace them and learn about them.
So the question in the Q&A is, thank you for that, Anita. Sorry, I hope I didn't cut you off there. Diane Perry asks, how do you build relationships with parents whose experiences with schools or other systems have been negative? How do you build trust with them?
I'd like to respond to that one. Okay. Yeah. So my experience, sometimes it is the school's fault. They've done poorly by the parents and by the students. Sometimes they have. In fact, you know, rather often, and I don't want to, you know, delve into that too much, but the way to build rapport between you, the teacher, and the classroom, or you, the administrator, is communication. I would send an email home every week of, this is what we're working in this week, and this is what we're going to be working about in the future. This is what we're working on. I also make communications when their son or daughter has done well. Phone calls, a personal phone call, because quite frankly, when they get a call from the teacher, they presume it's going to be negative news. So getting a pleasant phone call, I just wanted to make you aware that, you know, Susie turned in all of her homework this week, and I was really proud of her. We celebrated her in class, but I wanted you to be aware of that, Mom and Dad. She did a great job. So communication is a big part of it. And also collaboration. When parents feel open enough to say, this is what I'm seeing as a problem, let's work on it together. I think those are 2 critical parts in building that rapport.
One thing that we do in our teacher residency program, which is the program I work with at Propel, is we encourage our residents to send a parent survey, and we simply ask them. You know, we know that we have parents that are working, I hate to say non-traditional hours because any job is traditional, any hours are traditional, but you know, they might have a work schedule that doesn't necessarily jibe with what times the conferences are. So just working around them, you know, how do you want to be contacted and when? And just really asking them some kind of pointed questions about, you know, how do you, you know, what do you want for your child? How do you work with your child when they're overwhelmed? Just really asking the questions that you might want someone to ask you as a parent, and take your specific needs into account. One of the questions in the chat was, what was the name of the experimental scenarios I mentioned, example being a teen mom? That was a poverty simulation. So poverty simulations are becoming more popular among the education world. Hopefully they will also become part of the agencies that you folks are working for too.
Thank you, Nia.
Thank you so much, everyone. This was wonderful. I'd like to now ask just for a moment of your time before we say goodbye to everybody, the Pennsylvania Developmental Disabilities Council chairperson would like to just say a word or two. Thank you.
Everyone, my name is Lisa Sportelli. I'm the acting chairperson of the Pennsylvania Developmental Disabilities Council, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm a middle-aged white woman with pulled back dark red hair, wearing glasses and a colorful white, yellow, teal, and blue tie-dyed shirt with a virtual background of a summit in shades of blue behind me. On behalf of all of us at the PADD Council, we'd like to thank all of you who have taken the time out of your busy schedules to participate and present on such important and sometimes hard topics while reflecting on this year's theme of recover, rebuild, and reform. We've had some very meaningful discussions from the presenters, panel members, and participants. This sure has been quite the year for all of us, with a whole set of new challenges and obstacles. But one thing that still rings true each year at our annual summit is the commonality between all of us, and that we are all more alike than we are different. I'd like to thank Harrisburg University for the platform, our planning committee, council members, project officers, and staff, especially Dana Thompson for nurturing and growing the summit to be what it is today, and McKinley Rouse, who led the efforts this year. Hopefully next year we'll have the opportunity to meet in person again and continue our joint efforts. We believe that all of us marginalized people are stronger together. We believe in generic change and changing our communities in the broadest and most generic sense. We believe in inclusion. We prefer activities to be alongside and integrated with people without disabilities in regular and generic settings in regular communities. Groups of people with different disabilities congregated together does not constitute inclusion. We believe in cultural competence, and that disability competence cannot take place in isolation from the embrace of all human diversity. Therefore, we seek alliances with all those who are excluded or dispossessed on the grounds of poverty, race, ethnicity, or sexuality. One of the biggest themes I've heard throughout the past 2 days is that all of us could use some time of support right now, and reaching out and staying connected with each other is so vitally important. I encourage everyone to please fill out our short 2 to 3 minute survey. And please, let's keep the conversations flowing and join us on Twitter at PADD Council, #Community Allies, and our Facebook page. And as always, our website, paddc.org. We look forward to seeing you all in person next year. Thanks again, everyone. Take care of yourselves, each other, and have a great evening.